So I want you to imagine building a computer so incredibly advanced that it could manage 4 megabytes of memory in an era when most machines absolutely choked on 64 kilobytes.
Right, which was basically the standard back then.
Exactly. And imagine engineering this internal audio chip that rivaled, like, professional studio synthesizers.
Oh yeah, truly top-tier stuff for the time.
But then, imagine taking all that revolutionary, world-beating technology, stuffing it into a plastic case that looks exactly like a Fisher-Price toy, and completely forgetting to include a power switch.
I mean, it sounds like a satirical sketch about the tech industry, right? But it's actually a very real, very sobering piece of computing history.
It really is. So today is April 18, 2026, and welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission today is to explore the fascinating, contradictory, and honestly, ultimately tragic anatomy of a machine that represents the ultimate what-if of retro technology.
The Enterprise 64 microcomputer.
That's the one. And we're pulling from a few sources today, primarily this vintage November 1984 hardware review published in Personal Computer World magazine.
Which is a fantastic primary source.
It is, yeah. And we are cross-referencing that with adjusted 2026 economic data to really try to understand the market forces at play here.
And, the reason we are spending our time analyzing a failed piece of 1980s consumer electronics is that it provides this masterclass in a trap that modern tech companies still fall into today.
Oh, 100%.
We like to believe in this strict meritocracy of hardware, that the best engineering inevitably wins the market.
Right. Build a better mousetrap and the world beats a path to your door.
Exactly. But the Enterprise 64 just completely shatters that illusion. It perfectly illustrates the ruthless gap between visionary engineer-led development and, well, actual commercial viability.
Yeah, because you can do almost everything perfectly on the inside of the box and still fail spectacularly if you misjudge the human being sitting on the outside of the box. So to understand why this architectural marvel ended up as just a footnote, we really have to start by looking at the specific window of time it was born into. Because the tech industry, in the early 1980s, it moved at a terrifying speed.
It really did, and the tragedy of the Enterprise 64 begins with the fact that it arrived a full 12 months late to its own launch party.
12 months?
Yeah, a whole year. In 1983, when it was first announced, the specifications were genuinely jaw-dropping, but it was just plagued by severe production delays.
And compounding those manufacturing delays was this severe corporate identity crisis, right? They went through multiple name changes before the product ever even hit a store shelf.
Yeah, it was chaotic.
They started as Elon, then they were Flan, then they were Elon again, and finally they landed on Enterprise. I have to imagine that kind of public wavering does fatal damage to a brand.
Oh, absolutely.
You're trying to build a loyal user base, people are saving up their money, and you keep changing the name on the door.
It completely erodes consumer trust, which, was a highly fragile commodity in the early 80s home computer market.
Right.
You have to remember, buying a computer back then wasn't an impulse purchase or like a minor upgrade cycle, like buying a new tablet today. It was a massive capital investment for a family.
Yeah, you were buying into an entire ecosystem.
Exactly. You were betting that the company would survive long enough to produce software, peripherals, and give you support. So when a company promises the moon, goes silent for months, changes its name 3 times, and repeatedly misses its shipping deadlines,
the market just assumes you're going bankrupt.
Spot on. It's the vaporware squeeze. You are bleeding credibility while your engineers are desperately trying to finish the product.
But what really fascinates me about the source material is what happened during that lost year. Because the rest of the industry didn't just, freeze in place to wait for the Enterprise to figure out its supply chain.
No, the landscape shifted seismically beneath their feet. The review from Personal Computer World highlights exactly who ate their lunch during that 12-month delay.
Okay, let's go through them.
First, you had Sinclair releasing the QL.
Right, and the QL wasn't just another cheap 8-bit machine, was it?
Far from it. The QL utilized a Motorola 68008 processor.
Okay, for the listener who maybe isn't steeped in vintage processor architecture, what does that actually mean?
Well, it was a massive evolutionary leap. It was a 32-bit processor architecture squeezed onto an 8-bit data bus.
Wow.
Yeah, it meant the QL could handle preemptive multitasking, meaning running multiple programs seemingly at the same time, and it came bundled with serious business software.
Like a word processor in a spreadsheet, right?
Exactly, and a database. Sinclair was aggressively targeting the professional home user.
Okay, so the high-end, serious computing market gets intercepted by Sinclair. But what about the entry-level plug-and-play market?
That flank was completely attacked by Amstrad. They launched the CPC 464, which was honestly a stroke of marketing genius.
Because it's all in one unit, right?
Yes, it had a cassette tape deck built directly into the keyboard, but most importantly, it was sold in a single box with its own dedicated color monitor.
Which solved a massive friction point for consumers.
Hmm.
I mean, if you bought a standard computer back then, you had to fight with your family to hook it up to the single-colored television in the living room.
Exactly.
Amstrad gave you everything you needed to compute in your bedroom with one power plug straight out of one box.
Precisely. Amstrad understood that convenience often trumps raw computing power. And if that wasn't enough, that same year saw the invasion of the Japanese MSX standard.
Right, the MSX.
Yeah, instead of one company building a proprietary machine, MSX was a unified hardware architecture licensed to companies like Sony, Panasonic, and Toshiba. It promised cross-compatibility.
So an MSX game tape bought for a Sony machine would work flawlessly on a Yamaha machine.
Exactly.
It's basically the 1980s equivalent of the Android operating system, a standardized platform across multiple hardware manufacturers.
That's a great analogy, yeah.
So let me paint the picture for you. The enterprise team finally finishes their machine. They step out of the laboratory, blinking into the sunlight, holding this incredible piece of technology.
Ready to conquer the world.
Right. But they look around, and the high-end market is buying Sinclair. The convenience market is buying Amstrad. And the standardization market is buying MSX. The reviewer in the magazine actually delivers this absolutely crushing line.
Oh, I know the one.
They write that what was once an impressive specification now looks only, and I quote, par for the course.
It is a brutal assessment, but it's an accurate one. It really speaks to a psychological trap in product development that we now call the sunk cost fallacy.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
Well, the enterprise engineering team spent a year meticulously perfecting their vision, refusing to compromise on their internal specs. But in technology, the value of a specification is fiercely tied to the calendar.
Right.
What is a revolutionary breakthrough in late 1983 becomes just a baseline expectation by late 1984.
Which kind of raises a dilemma that I see modern software and hardware companies agonizing over today.
Yeah.
And I want your take on this.
Sure.
Is it ultimately worse to launch a slightly buggy, incomplete product on time, or to launch an absolutely perfect product a year late?
You know, that depends entirely on your existing market leverage. If you are an established behemoth with a captive ecosystem, think of Apple today, for example, you can afford to be late.
Because people will wait for you.
Exactly. You can wait for competitors to test the waters and then release a highly polished, refined version of the technology. Your users will wait. But if you are a startup or an underdog trying to pry open a new market segment, being late is almost always a death sentence.
Because the oxygen just gets sucked out of the room.
Right. The available market share is consumed by the quote-unquote good enough products that are actually sitting on store shelves.
And the enterprise was effectively a startup.
Yes, they needed early adopters to build a community, write software, and create a network effect. A slightly buggy machine released in 1983 might have secured that critical mass of users.
And they could have just patched the software or released a version 2.0.
Exactly. By waiting for perfection, they launched into a saturated market with zero momentum.
They totally missed the window. But, I mean, if their timing was an exercise in corporate tragedy, the actual physical object they delivered was an exercise in absolute bewilderment.
Bewilderment is a good word for it.
Because despite the delay, when this machine finally arrived on a reviewer's desk, it was impossible to ignore. You physically could not look away from it.
Oh, the physical casing of the Enterprise 64 is one of the most polarizing designs in computing history.
Polarizing is a very polite word for it. Let's describe this for the listener because the source material paints a vivid picture. We are looking at a low-profile case made of black ABS plastic.
Right.
It features a sloping keyboard. Protruding from the left side is a large external finned metal heatsink.
Yeah, it looks like a radiator you'd find bolted to the side of a dirt bike.
Seriously. And right in the center, there's a glowing red LED, and then there is the color scheme of the keys.
Yes. Black, bright green, vibrant blue, and deep red.
The reviewer explicitly compares it to a child's playset. They say it looks like a cross between a Tonka-toy, a canal of the USS Enterprise, and a rubber typing mat.
It's quite the visual.
I mean, trying to take this thing seriously must have been a mental hurdle. Why on earth did they design it like this?
To understand the sheer strangeness of that choice, you really have to look at the prevailing design language of the era. By 1984, the home computer market was desperately trying to mature.
Right.
Companies wanted to shake off the perception that these machines were just expensive video game consoles. Look at the industrial design of the Commodore 128, the IBM PC, or the early Apple Macintosh.
Yeah, they were embracing professional, muted aesthetics.
Exactly. Lots of beige, heavy use of gray, sharp right angles.
The serious office equipment look. Because, let's be honest, teenagers were convincing their parents to drop serious money by claiming they needed these machines for homework and education.
Right. The classic Trojan horse argument.
Yeah. And you cannot make a straight-faced argument to your mother that you need a computer for your science fair project if the thing literally looks like a Fisher-Price activity center.
I wouldn't go so far as to say they didn't care about their users' needs, but it is a classic case of engineer-led development operating in a vacuum, entirely walled off from marketing realities.
That makes sense.
And the source material actually notes a fascinating detail. Early prototype demonstration models of the Enterprise used varying shades of gray. They looked incredibly purposeful and sleek.
Wait, really? So they had a professional-looking prototype, and they consciously chose to scrap it for the Tonka-toy aesthetic just before production?
They did. It highlights a profound identity crisis. The internal hardware, which we'll dissect shortly, screams that this is a machine for hardcore machine code programmers and serious hobbyists.
Yeah.
But the external plastic casing suggests it belongs in a neon-lit arcade or a 10-year-old's brightly colored bedroom. That dissonance confuses the buyer. When a consumer looks at a product, they immediately ask, is this for me?
And the Enterprise's design answered that question with a confusing shrug.
Exactly.
Let's talk about the primary way a user actually interacted with this confused machine, the keyboard. It's a full-stroke keyboard, meaning the keys actually travel downwards when you press them, unlike the flat membrane keyboards on cheaper machines like the ZX81.
Right.
But the reviewer has major issues with it. They describe the typing action as slushy. And to make matters worse, to ensure you actually registered a keystroke, the machine had to emit an audible bleep from the internal speaker.
Which is a massive red flag for hardware quality.
Okay, can you explain why that is? Why is an audio bleep such a damning indictment of a keyboard?
It really comes down to tactile feedback and physical certainty. On a high-quality mechanical keyboard like the ones IBM was producing, or even the solid rubber dome switches on the BBC Micro, the user feels a distinct physical bump when the electrical contact is made.
Okay.
Your fingers learn to trust that physical sensation. You know the letter has been typed without having to look at the screen.
Or it's all muscle memory.
Exactly. When a keyboard feels slushy, it means that physical actuation point is vague. The user presses the key, but they aren't physically sure if the computer registered it.
Oh, that sounds so frustrating.
It is. To compensate for this cheap, ambiguous physical hardware, the engineers had to add a software crutch, the auditory bleep.
So it forces the user to rely on their ears to confirm a physical action.
Yeah. If you're marketing a machine that includes a built-in word processor, a slushy keyboard is an unforced error of the highest magnitude.
That's rough. But they did include some forward-thinking ideas on that keyboard, to be fair. There are 8 rectangular blue function keys arrayed across the top.
Yes.
And by using combinations of the Shift, Control, and Alt keys, those 8 physical keys could trigger 32 distinct programmable functions.
Now, that is genuinely excellent user interface design. It allows power users to map complex multi-keystroke commands to a single button press. It speeds up programming and data entry significantly. But, as with everything on the Enterprise, that brilliant touch is immediately undercut by a baffling ergonomic disaster located just a few inches away.
You are talking about the built-in joystick.
The built-in green joystick.
Okay, for you listening, I need you to visualize your current computer keyboard. Now imagine a thumb-sized plastic joystick protruding directly out of the casing in the lower right-hand corner.
Right, exactly where a touch typist naturally rests the heel of their right palm.
I am furious on behalf of 1980s typists. How does a design like that make it off the drawing board? I mean, if I'm trying to type a fast 80-word-per-minute document and my palm keeps bumming a joystick that sends the cursor flying across the screen, I am throwing the computer out a window.
It is an almost unbelievable ergonomic failure. The reviewer actually notes that the designers intended the joystick to replace traditional cursor control keys, the arrow keys.
Okay, wait, what?
Yeah, they claimed that with practice, nudging the joystick was a faster way to edit text in the word processor.
Editing text with an arcade joystick? That's like trying to perform surgery with a baseball bat.
It is entirely unorthodox, yes. But again, it reveals that internal tug-of-war. They wanted the credibility of a serious computer, hence the word processor. But they wanted the immediate fun of a game console, hence the joystick.
But the fatal flaw in their logic is that the joystick they included wasn't even good for gaming, right?
Right. The reviewer specifically points out that it did not feel sturdy enough to withstand the punishment of heavy arcade games like those infamous joystick-destroying track and field decathlon games popular at the time.
So it ruined the typing experience, and it wasn't robust enough for serious gaming, a compromise that fails on both fronts.
Exactly.
It is the physical embodiment of their entire corporate identity crisis.
Mm-hmm.
But if the exterior design was a desperate, confused attempt to stand out, the engineering choices they made on the back of the machine suggest a company that was actively, aggressively hostile to the rest of the tech industry.
You are referring to the input-output ports.
Let's spin this Tonka-toy around and look at the connectivity, because it is staggering. It's like they threw every conceivable port at the wall to see what would stick.
They certainly didn't skimp on ports.
On the left side, you have a bay for ROM cartridges, which houses the included 64K basic programming language.
Yeah.
Along the back, you have a television output, and you have ports to drive 2 separate cassette tape recorders.
Yes.
Now pause right there. Why 2 cassette ports? I barely had the patience to load a game off 1 tape drive. Why would a home user need 2?
Well, having dual cassette ports was actually a powerful feature for data processing. Remember, they didn't have hard drives, and floppy disk drives were prohibitively expensive for most home users.
Right, tape was the only affordable option.
Exactly. Cassette tapes were linear storage. If you wanted to read a database of addresses, process them, and save the updated lists, doing that on 1 tape drive required constantly loading data into the computer's limited RAM, stopping the tape, processing, and then writing back over the tape.
Oh, that sounds incredibly slow.
It was incredibly slow, and it risked corrupting your only copy. With 2 ports, you could dedicate 1 tape drive purely to reading the raw data stream, and the second tape drive purely to writing the processed output stream.
Okay, so a poor man's dual floppy drive setup. That actually makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
They also included a monitor output that supported both RGB and composite video, which is great for picture quality.
Very true.
And they included an RS-432 serial and network port. Now, I know what an RS-232 port is. That's the classic serial port we use for dial-up modems and early mice. But what is an RS-432 port?
That is a very perceptive question because the distinction is crucial to understanding the enterprise's ambitions. An RS-232 connection, which was the industry standard, uses an unbalanced single-ended signal.
Meaning what exactly?
Without getting too deep into electrical engineering, it basically means the data is sent as a voltage relative to a common ground wire. The problem with RS-232 is that it is highly susceptible to electrical noise and degradation over long cables.
So if the cable is too long, the data gets corrupted.
Precisely. RS-432, which is closely related to the RS-422 standard, uses differential signaling. It uses 2 separate wires for every data signal, sending inverted voltages down each.
Okay.
The receiving end measures the difference between the 2 wires rather than comparing 1 wire to ground. This completely cancels out ambient electrical noise.
But why does a kid in a bedroom need noise-canceling data cables?
They don't, but schools and small businesses do. Because RS-432 is so resistant to noise, it allows for much faster data transfer rates over much longer cable runs.
Ah, I see where this is going.
Yeah, the enterprise was designed out of the box to be daisy-chained together into a local area network of up to 32 machines. A teacher could have a master enterprise machine on their desk, pushing educational software out to 31 student machines across a classroom, just using standard cables.
That is genuinely visionary for 1984. I mean, they are anticipating the network classroom a decade before it became standard.
It really was ahead of its time.
But, and here's where the hostility comes in, for all this brilliant connectivity, they forgot the most basic interface of all.
Well,
there is no power switch.
Right. There is no physical toggle to cut electricity to the motherboard. To turn the machine off, you literally have to pull the plug out of the wall socket.
Which feels so violently incorrect when handling sensitive electronics. I mean, to reboot the machine, you have to use a large red reset button on the back.
Yes, the source details this actually. 1 press of the red button triggers a warm reset, and 2 quick presses triggers a cold reset.
What's the difference?
A warm reset reboots the operating system but attempts to leave the contents of the RAM intact, which is useful if your program crashes but you want to recover your code. A cold reset completely flushes the memory and starts from zero.
It's like a bizarre Morse code minigame
Hmm.
just to turn your computer on.
It really is.
But the lack of a power switch isn't the hostile part. The hostility lies in the joystick ports. And I am genuinely angry on behalf of 1984 consumers about this.
I don't blame you.
The industry standard at the time was the 9-pin D subconnector. It was the plug that Atari popularized. Everyone owned an Atari-style joystick. You could buy them at any electronics store.
Yeah.
What did Enterprise do?
Enterprise chose to use a proprietary exposed edge connector directly on the printed circuit board. You had to clip a specialized housing over the exposed silicon traces on the board.
Which means your existing joysticks were completely useless. You couldn't just plug them in. You had to buy proprietary adapter leads manufactured exclusively by Enterprise.
It is a textbook example of attempting to enforce ecosystem lock-in through artificial hardware barriers.
It is the 1980s equivalent of a modern smartphone manufacturer removing the universal headphone jack to force you to buy their proprietary Bluetooth earbuds.
Exactly.
But here is the critical difference. When a trillion-dollar tech giant removes a headphone jack, they have the massive market share necessary to force the entire accessory industry to adapt to their new standard. Enterprise had zero market share.
That's the kicker.
They were a startup that was already a year late to the party. You do not try to force a proprietary hardware standard when nobody owns your machine yet. That is pure corporate hubris.
It is an incredible miscalculation of leverage. It creates a massive immediate barrier to entry for the consumer.
Yeah, imagine a parent in a computer store.
Yeah.
They're looking at the Commodore 64, and the salesman says, you can use the 3 joysticks you already have at home.
Right.
Then they look at the Enterprise, and the salesman says, you have to buy these specific 15-pound adapter cables just to play a game. That friction alone will lose you the sale.
And the financial friction doesn't stop there. Let's talk about the right side of the machine, which features a massive 64-way expansion port.
Right. This port is technically incredible. It exposes the main processor bus, the memory lines, the audio lines, and the video lines. It allows you to theoretically plug in anything: floppy disk drives, extra RAM, external processors.
It is an engineer's dream. Total modular expandability.
Yes, but it is a consumer's nightmare. Because the source material reveals the expansion port trap. You can't just buy a floppy disk drive and plug it in. To use that expansion port for any major peripheral, the manufacturer required you to first buy a base unit.
Yes, the dreaded base unit.
This is a separate piece of plastic and circuitry that you sat the computer on top of, and then you stacked your peripherals onto the base unit.
It transforms every peripheral purchase into a two-step process. You aren't just paying the high cost of an early floppy disk drive. You are paying an entirely separate toll just to build the infrastructure to connect it.
It exponentially increases the hidden long-term cost of ownership.
Absolutely.
So we have a plastic case that looks like a toy, a slushy keyboard with an audio bleep, an ergonomic nightmare of a joystick, and a suite of proprietary ports designed to drain your wallet.
Not a great start.
No. To understand why anyone cared about this machine at all, we have to look past the plastic. We have to go inside. And to do that, the reviewer notes, you have to remove 14 individual screws.
14 screws simply to remove the top casing.
Which tells you immediately that this company did not want you tinkering. They did not embrace the hacker DIY ethos of early computing.
Definitely not.
But if you have the patience to remove those 14 screws, you finally see the true heart and soul of the Enterprise. You see a rather cramped printed circuit board, and sitting on that board are the components that make this tragedy so compelling.
This is where the story pivots from a comedy of marketing errors to a genuine marvel of silicon engineering.
Let's break down the brains of the operation. At the center of the board is a Z80A microprocessor running at 4 MHz, flanked by 64 kilobytes of RAM spread across 8 physical memory chips.
The Z80 was ubiquitous. It was the reliable workhorse of the 8-bit era, powering everything from the Sinclair ZX Spectrum to arcade cabinets like Pac-Man.
Yeah, totally standard.
And at 4 MHz, it was running at a very respectable, snappy speed for 1984.
But the Z80 isn't the star of the show here. The Z80 is just the manager. The real talent on this motherboard are 2 massive 72-pin custom-built silicon chips. And I absolutely love this detail. The engineers named these highly complex integrated circuits after themselves.
Yeah, Nick and Dave.
The chips are named Nick and Dave.
Naming custom silicon was a rare but charming practice. Nick Toop designed the video architecture, and Dave Woodfield designed the audio and memory management architecture.
Okay, let's talk about Dave first, because Dave is an absolute beast of a chip. The source review states that Dave's audio capabilities are firmly on par with the Commodore 64's SID chip.
And for anyone who knows retro audio, the SID chip is legendary.
It's considered one of the greatest synthesizers ever put into a computer. So what exactly makes Dave so powerful?
Well, Dave is not just generating simple square wave beeps. Dave is a complex synthesizer. It offers 3 independent sound channels, plus a dedicated noise channel for percussion or sound effects.
Okay, standard enough so far.
But it spans 8 octaves in stereo, and where it truly shines is in its modulation and envelope control.
Okay, pause. I need you to translate that. For the listener whose audio knowledge begins and ends with turning the volume knob up on Spotify, what is envelope control and modulation, and why did it matter in 1984?
Okay, think about the difference between hitting a key on a piano and bowing a string on a violin.
Sure.
The piano note starts incredibly loud the instant the hammer hits the string, and then it slowly fades out. The violin note swells up slowly as the bow moves, holds a steady volume, and stops abruptly when the bow stops.
Right.
That shape of the sound over time, how fast it attacks, decays, sustains, and releases, is called the envelope. Cheap computers could only turn a sound on or off. Dave allowed programmers to precisely draw the envelope of the sound in hardware, creating incredibly realistic instruments.
Wow, that's really advanced. And what about modulation?
Dave supported ring modulation. This is a process where you take one sound wave, the carrier, and multiply it by another sound wave, the modulator.
Okay, and what does that do?
It creates entirely new, complex harmonic frequencies that weren't present in either original wave. It produces these harsh, metallic, bell-like tones. If you ever heard the voice of a Dalek in Doctor Who, that is classic ring modulation.
Oh, wow. Okay, I can picture that exactly.
Right, and Dave could do this mathematically in real time without burdening the main processor.
So Dave is an entire electronic music studio on a chip. But that is only his part-time job.
Yeah.
Dave's true superpower, the thing that makes him arguably one of the most advanced pieces of silicon of his generation, is his role as a memory manager.
Yes. This is where we get into the truly revolutionary architecture of the enterprise. We mentioned earlier that the main processor is an 8-bit Z80. Now, an 8-bit processor uses a 16-bit address bus to talk to the computer's memory.
Walk us through the math of that. What does a 16-bit address bus actually mean in practical terms?
Well, a bit is simply a 0 or a 1. The address bus is the wiring the processor uses to point to a specific location in the RAM. If you have 16 bits, the total number of unique addresses you can create is 2 to the power of 16. If you calculate 2 to the power of 16, you get exactly 65,536.
65 kilobytes.
Exactly. That is a hard, inescapable physical limit of the Z80's design. The processor is physically incapable of seeing more than 64K of memory at any given nanosecond. It doesn't have the wiring to count any higher.
It's like working at a tiny desk that can only hold exactly 64,000 sheets of paper. If you try to put sheet number 65,000 on the desk, it falls off onto the floor.
That is the physical reality. However, the enterprise engineers wanted to build a machine that could expand massively in the future. They didn't want to be trapped by that 64K limit.
So what do they do?
So they tasked the Dave chip with intercepting the processor's memory requests. Dave decodes a 22-bit address system.
Let me do the math on that. 2 to the power of 22. That's over 4 million.
Yes. 4,194,304 bytes. 4 megabytes.
Wait, so how does Dave force an 8-bit processor to access 4 megabytes of memory?
Through a process called memory paging, or bank switching, what Dave does is virtually divide the Z80's tiny 64K disk into 4 smaller sections, called pages, each 16K in size.
Okay, I'm following.
Meanwhile, Dave maintains a master map of the entire 4-megabyte memory space. When the Z80 needs a piece of data that isn't currently on its desk, Dave instantaneously reaches out into the vast 4-megabyte space, grabs the correct 16K chunk of data, and swaps it onto one of the pages on the Z80's desk.
Okay, let me expand on my analogy to make sure I really have this right. The processor is a clerk sitting at a tiny desk that only holds 64K of files. But standing right next to the clerk is Dave. And Dave is holding the keys to an impossibly massive, infinite filing cabinet in the next room.
Yes.
The clerk never leaves the desk. The clerk just shouts out a 22-bit file number. Dave sprints to the infinite filing cabinet, grabs the stack of papers, runs back, sweeps a pile of old papers off the clerk's desk, and drops the new stack right in front of him. And Dave does this millions of times a second, so perfectly that the clerk never even realizes the desk is small.
That is an absolutely flawless visualization of hardware bank switching. To the Z80 clerk, life is simple and fast. Dave absorbed all the incredible complexity of managing the inventory.
That's just wild.
To pull this off in custom silicon on a consumer home machine in 1984 is nothing short of breathtaking. It is the kind of memory virtualization technique that underpins modern cloud computing today, where the user is completely abstracted away from the physical hardware limits.
The Enterprise was built to scale into a future it sadly never survived to see.
Tragically, yes.
So Dave handles the audio and the infinite filing cabinet. Which brings us to his partner on the motherboard, Nick. Nick handles the video output. And Nick is doing things with television screens that seem like black magic for the era.
He really is.
The source review points out that Nick can display up to 256 colors on the screen simultaneously. That alone is impressive. But here is the impossible part. It says there is no trade-off between the screen resolution and the number of colors available.
Which breaks all the rules of the time.
Right. How is that functionally possible? In every other machine, if you want high resolution, you only get 2 colors. If you want 256 colors, it looks like giant, blocky Lego bricks because you run out of video memory.
You are describing a bitmap display, which was standard. In a bitmap display, a single chunk of memory dictates the color and resolution for the entire screen grid. If you want more colors per pixel, you need more memory per pixel.
Yeah.
If you run out of video RAM, you have to reduce the number of pixels, the resolution, to compensate.
So how does Nick cheat the system?
By entirely abandoning the concept of a rigid, uniform screen grid. Nick uses a system based on mode lines.
Mode lines.
To understand this, you have to visualize how a cathode ray tube television actually works. Inside the back of the TV, an electron gun fires a beam of light that sweeps horizontally from left to right, drawing a single line of pixels.
Right.
Then it moves down a fraction of an inch and draws the next horizontal line from left to right. It does this hundreds of times to draw one full frame of video.
Right. The scan lines.
Precisely.
Yeah.
What the NIC chip allows a programmer to do is literally interrupt the electron gun in between every single horizontal scan line and change the rules of the display on the fly.
Wait, really?
Yeah. Each horizontal line on the screen can have its own specific address in the video RAM, its own height, its own width, and its own completely distinct graphics mode.
Let's see if I grasp the power of this. Are you saying that line number 10 on the television could be a razor-sharp, high-resolution text display using only 2 colors, and the very next line underneath it, line 11, could be a low-resolution graphics mode using all 256 colors?
Yes. The screen parameters are completely fluid, changing microsecond by microsecond as the screen is actively being painted by the electron beam.
That is insane.
A skilled machine code programmer could mix and match resolutions and color depths anywhere on the screen, creating incredibly rich interfaces without exhausting the memory limit because they only use the heavy 256 color modes exactly where they were needed.
That is profound flexibility. And the way you define those colors is wild, too. You don't just pick color 1 or color 2 from a preset digital palette.
No, not at all.
You actually specify the colors as a fraction of the raw luminance generated by the red, green, and blue color guns in the television tube. You type a command like color 0.6, 0.60, mixing 60% red and 60% green, and you get an off yellow.
It's an analog fractional color mixing system controlled by digital software. It feels incredibly modern. It is remarkably similar to how web developers specify RGB values in CSS code today. It offered an artistic palette that was light years ahead of the garish, fixed colors of its competitors.
And with the Enterprise, there is always a but waiting to break your heart.
Always.
For all this incredible, groundbreaking video power, Nick has a fatal, inexcusable flaw. A flaw that dooms its potential as a gaming machine. Nick does not support hardware sprites.
This is perhaps the single most baffling engineering omission on the entire motherboard.
For the listener who doesn't code vintage video games, what is a hardware sprite and why is its absence a death sentence?
A hardware sprite is a small, independent, two-dimensional image. Think of the spaceship in Space Invaders or the character of Super Mario. When a video chip has hardware sprite capabilities, the chip itself handles the math of moving that character around the screen.
Okay, so the chip does the heavy lifting.
Yes. The sprite floats on an invisible layer above the background. The main processor just tells the video chip, move Mario to X coordinate 50, Y coordinate 100, and the video chip does it instantly. The background behind the character remains perfectly untouched.
It's like moving a refrigerator magnet across a painted canvas. The magnet moves, the painting underneath is fine.
Exactly. Because Nick lacked this feature, programmers had to rely on a software technique called bit splitting.
Which means what?
To move a character across the screen without a hardware sprite, the main Z80 processor has to do all the work. It has to calculate the character's new position, erase the character from its old position, carefully redraw the missing background pixels that the character was covering up, and then draw the character in the new position.
Good grief.
And it has to do this 60 times a second.
It's like trying to make an animated flipbook, but instead of just sketching the character in a slightly different pose on the next page, you have to painstakingly redraw the entire mountain range, the clouds, and the sky in the background on every single page just to make the character walk one step.
That is an excellent analogy. It is astronomically expensive in terms of computational processing power. The Z80 spends all its time constantly redrawing background graphics instead of calculating game logic or AI.
And the competitors didn't have this problem.
The Commodore 64 had hardware sprites. The MSX standard required hardware sprites. The fact that the brilliant Nick chip left them out meant that writing fast, smooth, arcade-quality action games for the Enterprise was excruciatingly difficult.
So if we zoom out, we have an engineering philosophy that is utterly schizophrenic. You have macro-level architecture like 4 megabyte memory paging and fractional color mixing that is sheer genius. But the practical application of that architecture completely ignores the dominant software market at the time, which was video games. It's like engineering the most fuel-efficient aerodynamic engine on Earth and putting it in a car with square wheels.
It demonstrates that the engineers were building a computer to solve fascinating theoretical problems, rather than building a consumer product to satisfy the actual demands of the marketplace.
Which perfectly transitions us to the software, because brilliant silicon is just a warm, expensive rock on your desk until you have an operating system and software to actually harness it.
Very true.
Which leads us to what happens when you finally push that red reset button and turn the machine on.
If the hardware architecture was a study in profound contrasts, the software environment they built to run on it was even more schizophrenic.
Let's start with the built-in software. If you turn the machine on without the 64K basic cartridge inserted into the side slot, the computer defaults to booting straight into an internal word processor.
Which, again, signals a desperate intent to be taken seriously as a business or educational machine. The concept of instant-on software was highly appealing.
You didn't have to wait 5 minutes for a tape drive to screech and hiss while it loaded a program.
Right. You sit down, turn it on, and you are immediately greeted by a blinking cursor ready to type a letter.
And at first glance, it sounds quite capable. The screen displays 2 horizontal bands at the top and bottom, indicating what the bleep function keys do. It features automatic word wrap, so you don't have to hit return at the end of every line.
Very helpful.
It's a full-screen editor, meaning you can move the cursor anywhere on the page using that horrific green joystick, of course. And if you have a monitor instead of obscurity television, it can display 80 columns of text across the screen, which is the professional standard for document editing.
It looks the part. However,
I am so glad you paused, because I read the review of this word processor in the source material, and my jaw dropped. I absolutely push back on the idea that they can legally call this a word processor.
it's pretty rough.
How can a software engineering team ship a text editing program that completely lacks a search and replace function? It also lacks the ability to do block moves, meaning you cannot highlight a paragraph, cut it, and paste it somewhere else in the document.
It is a staggering functional limitation.
For the listener, try to imagine doing your job today if your keyboard didn't have Control-C and Control-V. Try to imagine writing a 10-page report and realizing you misspelled a client's name, and you can't just hit find and replace. You have to manually scroll through the document and retype it every single time.
Yeah, that would be a nightmare.
Why would they omit features that were standard on dedicated word processors years earlier?
It likely came down to the severe constraints of the internal ROM memory, combined with the difficulty of managing dynamic text buffers in a limited RAM environment.
Meaning what, exactly?
Moving a block of text requires allocating a temporary holding space in memory, shifting all the subsequent text down to make room, and dealing with the memory fragmentation. It's complex to code cleanly. The engineers likely deemed the basic typing functionality, quote-unquote, good enough to ship, assuming power users would eventually buy a real word processing program on cassette or disk.
But by doing that, they undermine their own marketing. The reviewer states plainly that the built-in word processor is not sufficient to justify purchasing the machine. At best, it's a digital typewriter. It's a very expensive electronic piece of paper.
Yeah, that's a fair assessment.
So the instant-on software is a massive letdown. But if you plug in the basic programming cartridge, the story changes completely.
Yes, the 64K basic cartridge is a revelation for 1984. It is arguably the single most polished, impressive element of the entire enterprise package.
Let's dive deep into this because this is where the engineers really flex their academic muscles. Most home computers of this era used cheap, stripped-down dialects of Microsoft BASIC. They were rudimentary, clunky, and encouraged terrible programming habits.
They did.
The Enterprise, however, shipped with a highly structured, heavily modified version of ANSI Standard BASIC.
To appreciate how radical this was, we have to look at the specifics highlighted in the source review. Early BASIC programming relied heavily on the GOTO command.
Right.
You would write a line of code and then say GOTO line 50. It resulted in what programmers derisively called spaghetti code, an unreadable, tangled mess of jumping logic that was impossible to debug. The Enterprise BASIC almost entirely eliminated the need for GOTO statements by introducing rigorous structural logic blocks.
The review goes deep into the weeds on this. It highlights that the language supports DO loops with both while and until conditions. And crucially, it allows you to evaluate the condition as either a leading decision or a trailing condition. Let's explain that.
Okay, a leading condition evaluates the logic before the loop ever runs. Like, while x is less than 10, print hello. X is already 11, it never prints.
Got it.
A trailing condition puts the logic at the end of the block. Print hello. Repeat this loop until x equals 10. This guarantees the code runs at least once before it checks if it should stop. Having both options gave the programmer incredible granular control over execution flow.
It also featured proper if, then, else, and if blocks, and a full select case statement. This meant you didn't have to write 20 different if statements to check the value of a variable. You just wrote one elegant block of logic.
Which saves so much time and memory.
But here's the feature that absolutely blew my mind when reading the source material. Enterprise BASIC allowed programmers to define functions and procedures using local variables, and you could pass parameters to them either by value or by reference.
That is an advanced computer science concept that you simply did not see in 8-bit home computing.
Explain the difference for you listening at home. What is parameter passing by value versus passing by reference, and why is it so powerful?
Okay, imagine you have a highly confidential document, and you want an assistant to check the spelling. Passing a parameter by value is like handing the assistant a photocopy of the document. The assistant can mark it up, make changes, or spill coffee on it, but your original document locked in your filing cabinet remains perfectly safe and unaltered. In programming, by value means you send a copy of a variable's data to a function. The function can do math on it, but the original variable in the main program isn't changed.
So it's a safe sandbox. What about by reference?
Passing a parameter by reference is like handing the assistant the keys to your filing cabinet and telling them to edit the original master document. Instead of sending a copy of the data, the program sends a pointer, the exact memory address of where the original variable lives.
Oh, wow.
When the function alters the data, it is altering the original variable globally. It is incredibly memory efficient and fast because you aren't constantly making copies of data, but it requires extreme discipline from the programmer.
To put that kind of power pointers and references into a beginner's programming language is audacious. The reviewer even notes that they managed to get a recursive factorial program to work perfectly.
Recursion is another high-level concept. It is when a mathematical function calls itself from within its own code until it reaches a base state.
Like calculating factorials.
Exactly. To calculate the factorial of 5, which is 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1, a recursive function takes the number 5 and multiplies it by the factorial of 4, which multiplies it by the factorial of 3.
Right.
Each time it calls itself, the computer has to save the current state of the program onto a memory stack. On cheap machines, recursion instantly crashes the computer because it causes a stack overflow. It runs out of memory to keep track of the nested loops.
So it just dies.
Yeah, but the fact that Enterprise BASIC handled recursion flawlessly proves how robust the memory management of the Dave chip was.
The reviewer actually states that the underlying operating system felt like the flexible, powerful operating systems found on university mainframes from the 1960s. It was designed to allow multiple programs to reside in memory simultaneously, passing parameters between them.
It was an operating system with mainframe ambitions trapped in the plastic body of a Tonka-toy.
But I have to ask the critical question. Did this brilliant, structured academic language actually hurt them commercially? I mean, look, I am a massive tech nerd. I love local variables and recursive functions as much as the next person. But let's look at the actual demographic buying home computers in 1984.
Teenagers.
Exactly. Kids sitting in their bedrooms buying computer magazines and painstakingly typing in 500 lines of code just to make a pixelated alien move across the screen. Did the sheer academic complexity of this ANSI standard BASIC alienate the beginners who just wanted instant gratification?
I believe it absolutely did. Your instinct is spot on. The source material explicitly notes that a quick glance through the Enterprise Programming Manual makes the language seem, quote, a little daunting because of the sheer number of commands available.
Yeah, that would scare off a kid.
While a structured language like Pascal or Enterprise Basic is objectively better for teaching a computer science student good, clean programming habits, it possesses a significantly steeper initial learning curve than the dirty, simple Microsoft Basic found on the Commodore 64.
It's the difference between learning to ride a tricycle and learning to fly a helicopter. The helicopter is objectively a more advanced, capable machine. But the kid is going to have a lot more fun a lot faster on the tricycle.
And crucially, the kids on the tricycles had a massive social ecosystem. Because Microsoft Basic was so common, there were thousands of magazines, paperback books, and user groups sharing code.
A kid could borrow a code snippet from a friend Sinclair and hack it to work on their Commodore.
Precisely. The Enterprise arrived late with a unique, complex dialect of BASIC and therefore had zero community support. A beautifully structured programming language is useless to a 14-year-old if there is no one at school to share the code with.
So if we step back and look at the whole picture, we have an astonishing collection of elements. We have an operating system with mainframe-level logic. We have an external design that looks like a neon playset. We have proprietary joystick ports that lock you out of cheap accessories. We have the Nick and Dave chips providing 4 megabytes of address space and incredible color mixing, but failing to provide the hardware sprites necessary for arcade games.
It is a machine defined by profound, irreconcilable contradictions.
Which brings us to the ultimate reckoning. The single question that decides the fate of every piece of consumer technology ever manufactured, regardless of how elegant its silicon is. The question of price. What did this machine actually cost the consumer?
This is where we need to heavily lean on the 2026 economic data provided in our sources, because comparing 1984 prices to today without context is basically meaningless.
Very true.
In November of 1984, the 64-kilobyte version of the Enterprise launched with a retail price tag of £249.
Now, to our listener, in 2026, £249 sounds like pocket change for a computer. You can barely buy a pair of high-end wireless earbuds for that today. But we have to adjust that figure for over 4 decades of compounding inflation. When we do the math, £249 in 1984 translates to approximately £820 in 2026 purchasing power.
£820 is a substantial capital outlay. That puts it squarely in the territory of a modern flagship smartphone or a mid-range laptop. It requires budget planning for a household.
So put yourself in the shoes of a consumer in November 1984. You have the equivalent of £820 burning a hole in your pocket, and you walk into a high-street electronics retailer. What does the landscape actually look like? What are your options against the Enterprise?
Well, let's look at the fierce competition using those same 2026 adjusted figures. You could choose to spend your £820 on the Enterprise. Or you could look at the established dominant market leaders, the Commodore 64 or the Atari 800 XL.
Okay, what were they going for?
Due to aggressive price wars initiated by Commodore's CEO Jack Tramiel, those machines had dropped to a retail price of around £199. Adjusted for inflation, that is roughly £650 today.
So right off the bat, the Commodore 64 is nearly £170 cheaper than the Enterprise. And what do you actually get by saving that £170? You get safety. You get a massive, deeply entrenched ecosystem. You get a library of thousands upon thousands of games, utilities, and applications.
Right.
You get a machine that has word processors that actually feature a search and replace function.
Exactly. You are not just buying silicon, you are buying network effects. You are buying the peace of mind that when you go back to the store next month, there will be new software on the shelf for your machine.
Or, let's imagine a different consumer. Let's say you were a parent and you were actually willing to spend a bit more money to avoid the headache of cables and fighting over the living room television.
Yeah.
You look at the Amstrad CPC 464, it launched at £329, which adjusts to roughly £1,080 in today's money.
For that £1,080, the Amstrad gave you the computer keyboard with a built-in data cassette deck. And this is the killer app. a dedicated color monitor included in the same box.
It's the ultimate plug-and-play solution. You carry one box to the bedroom, plug in one power cable, and the child is computing. No proprietary joystick adapters needed, no stacking base units to expand it. So as a consumer, you have to look at the Enterprise and ask a very difficult question. Why would I buy this?
That is the tragic synthesis of its failure. The Enterprise was hopelessly trapped in an economic uncanny valley.
Unpack that term for us in this context.
The uncanny valley usually refers to robotics that look almost human but are unsettlingly slightly off. In economics, it refers to a product that sits awkwardly between two distinct value propositions, failing to satisfy either.
Right.
The Enterprise was too expensive to compete on price against the cheap, software-rich entry-level machines like the Commodore. But simultaneously, it lacked the integrated convenience and complete out-of-the-box packaging of the slightly more expensive premium machines like the Amstrad.
So it appeals to no one except the extreme fringe.
Precisely. The incredible internal architecture, Dave's 22-bit 4 megabyte memory paging, Nick's independent mode lines, the recursive capabilities of the ANSI basics, those are highly abstract features.
Yeah.
They appeal intensely to a microscopic fraction of the consumer market, the hardcore machine code programmers and computer science purists. But a hardware platform cannot survive on the purchases of a few thousand purists. It needs mass adoption to convince third-party developers to write software. Without software, the hardware dies.
It is a devastating reality check for anyone in the tech industry. It proves that possessing superior internal architecture guarantees absolutely nothing. You can engineer the most elegant silicon on the planet, but if your price point, your physical industrial design, your timing to market do not align perfectly with what the average consumer actually wants and understands at that exact historical moment, you are doomed to obscurity.
It is a stark reminder that while hardware engineering is governed by the rigid, predictable laws of physics and mathematics, product management is an art governed by the chaotic, unpredictable laws of human psychology and market economics.
Well said.
The enterprise engineering team succeeded wildly in building a phenomenal, forward-thinking computer. The enterprise executive and marketing teams failed utterly in building a viable consumer product.
The reviewer in the 1984 source material offers a conclusion that feels almost like a eulogy. They write, quote, "The Enterprise is still ahead of the field in terms of technical specification, although the competition is obviously a lot stronger now than a year ago. The time it has taken to deliver the machine has hindered its chance of success."
It's very poignant.
It is such a quiet, heartbreaking summary of a brilliant flashing failure. Let's start to pull these threads together and draw some final conclusions about what the legacy of the Enterprise 64 means for us today.
I think the legacy of the Enterprise is a testament to the fact that technological evolution is rarely a straight line of constant improvement. It is a messy, chaotic tree with countless dead branches.
We have spent the last hour or so dissecting every inch of this machine, and the sheer volume of what-ifs is staggering. We are looking at a genuine architectural marvel from 1984, a machine equipped with custom-designed silicon that could manipulate 4 megabytes of RAM through a brilliantly conceived 22-bit paging system while running on an 8-bit processor limit.
It's mind-blowing when you think about it.
We are looking at a video chip that could dynamically interrupt an electron beam to pump out 256 colors on one line and high-resolution text on the next. It featured a programming language that brought the structural elegance and recursive power of university mainframes down to a home cartridge.
It was, without question, a machine built by ambitious dreamers, intended for other ambitious dreamers.
But those dreams were shattered by the blunt force trauma of commercial reality. It was undone by a crippling year-long delay that allowed competitors to release good enough machines that swallowed the market share.
Yep.
It was sabotaged by a profoundly confused physical identity, a serious, powerful computer trapped inside the plastic shell of a garish toy, handicapped by a slushy keyboard and a joystick placed exactly where your typing hand needed to rest.
The joystick still gets me.
Me too. And it was strangled by a pricing strategy that left it stranded in the uncanny valley between cheaper rivals and more convenient all-in-one setups. And it was ultimately alienated from its users by hostile, arrogant decisions like forcing proprietary joystick ports on a market that already had a universal standard.
It serves as a permanent plastic and silicon record of a very specific moment in the history of technology, a moment where raw ambition dramatically outpaced practical execution. But beyond the nostalgia, I believe it leaves us with a critical lens through which to view the technology we interact with right now. today. I want you to think about the technology ecosystem you rely on at this very moment. The smartphone resting in your pocket, the operating system powering your laptop, the cloud platforms where you store your data.
Okay.
We look at these dominant systems and assume they won because they were inherently, objectively, the best technology available. But the story of the enterprise forces us to ask, how many superior, elegantly engineered products have we lost to history?
How many Daves and Nicks are sitting in a landfill?
Exactly. How many revolutionary hardware architectures died quietly simply because an inferior, less capable competitor managed to ship their product 12 months earlier and capture the early adopters? How many brilliant software platforms evaporated because a stubborn executive insisted on a proprietary charging cable or an anti-consumer port that drove users away?
Wow, that's a lot to think about.
The laws of physics dictate what silicon can do. But product launches are dictated by the ruthless, unforgiving realities of economic timing, ecosystem lock-in, and human psychology. The objective best technology very rarely wins. The best packaged, best timed product wins.
That is a profound perspective. The most magnificent, structurally perfect skyscraper in the world is utterly useless if you build it in a neighborhood nobody wants to visit and you forget to put a handle on the front door. Thank you for joining us on this incredibly detailed deep dive into the brilliant failure of the Enterprise 64. Keep questioning the tech that won, keep wondering about the masterpieces that could have been, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.